They insist he couldn't have seemed more normal.
I've never even seen the man violent at all. He's never even really raised his voice, even when we're just sitting there talking.
He always made us feel pretty much like we had nothing to worry about. Never made us feel uncomfortable.
Yosemite National Park is one of America's most breathtaking wildernesses. Each year, millions of visitors travel there, drawn by the promises of peace, adventure, and untouched beauty. The park feels timeless and safe. But beneath its postcard-perfect landscape lies a darker truth. Wilderness can be isolating. Trails vanish quickly. Help is often miles away. The 22nd of July 1999. 36-year-old Dr. Desmond Kidd was the medical director for Yosemite National Park. He had just spent 24 hours on call at the park's clinic, and it had been a busy one. He got back to his cabin, exhausted and ready to relax, but then his pager went off. He was needed to join in the search for a missing woman, with the dispatcher saying it had law enforcement implications. In his 2.5 years of working in the national park, Dr. Kidd had helped rescue plenty of people who'd become lost, but before setting off towards the small hamlet of Forester, he was warned that this search was very different. 26-year-old naturalist Joey Armstrong had been due to spend the weekend visiting her friends, but when she failed to turn up, they feared something terrible had happened. For the previous year, Joey had lived with her boyfriend and another roommate in one of the cabins in the park. That cabin was now cordoned off as her white pickup truck sat parked in the drive, her bags loaded for the trip, and there was evidence that something nefarious had happened. Tyre tracks, broken sunglasses, and a red mechanic's hat. The search team decided to start close by, splitting into 5 groups to cover the surrounding wider area. Dr. Kidd and 4 others moved into the woods along Crane Creek as they searched for any trace of the missing Joey. It didn't take long before they began to notice signs of a struggle. Fresh footprints, trampled ferns and grass, and snapped saplings, all hinting at someone running. In a narrow ditch filled with 3 feet of stagnant water, Dr. Kidd caught the shimmer of a keyring in the sunlight. Just beyond it, he saw something far worse. The body of a woman, dressed in a white t-shirt and blue jeans. As he stepped closer, a horrifying detail came into view, stopping him cold and turning his stomach. "Jesus," he muttered before running back to the lead ranger. "We have an 1144, he reported, using the code for a dead body. He followed it up with, "She's been decapitated." The 4th of December 1972, Merced, California. As 7-year-old Stephen Stainer walked home from school down Yosemite Parkway, a man came up to him. A friendly-looking man who said he wanted to talk to Stephen's mom about a donation to a church. The man led Stephen to a car, where 40-year-old drifter Kenneth Eugene Parnell was sat. The man was Parnell's co-worker, someone described in one report as a slow-witted fellow who had been recruited to help Parnell abduct a child. Stephen got into the car, and Parnell began to drive. He soon stopped at a payphone where he came back to the car and told Stephen that his parents no longer wanted him, and he was going to be going with him. And with that, Stephen Stainer vanished.
Stephen had walked almost all the way home. That's when it happened. A man in a car offered him a ride. It happened here at this corner, and it was such a classic situation, the kind against which parents are constantly warning their children. The next morning, there was an empty desk in the 2nd grade class at Charles Wright School.
When he failed to come home, the alarm was raised, and Merced was soon out looking for young Stephen. Stephen's disappearance consumed his parents, Kay and Delbert, who threw themselves into the desperate searches to find him. They handed out flyers, put up billboards, and even sought help from psychics. Kay, crushed by the weight of her son's absence, grew distant and cold, rarely showing affection. Delbert, openly heartbroken over the loss of his son, also struggled to cope. Stephen's room was left untouched. Nobody was allowed in there. In that shadow of grief and fading hope were the couple's other children. Stephen's older brother, Carey, who was just 11 at the time and deeply affected by his little brother's abduction, would sometimes find his father rifling through Stephen's clothes, crying. It wasn't just the family that was changed by Stephen's abduction, the community was too. Parents were terrified, and many children were now no longer allowed to walk to school unaccompanied. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Yet for the Stainers, time felt frozen in that terrible single afternoon. Every phone call made their hearts stop. Every knock at the door could be the moment he came back, or the moment that their worst fears were confirmed. Stephen's siblings also grew up inside that vacuum of grief and unanswered questions. They had no idea that Stephen, unbelievably, after all of this time, was still alive. His kidnapper, Kenneth Parnell, had previously gone to prison before for abducting and sexually abusing an 8-year-old boy in Bakersfield. And after abducting Stephen, they would spend the next 7 years drifting between cabins, trailer parks and motels. Stephen had been drugged during his first few weeks in a bid to wipe his memory, and over the next 7 years he would be forced to call his abducted dad whilst being subjected to appalling abuse. He was even enrolled at a local school under a fake name, Dennis. The school failed to pull his records, and they had no idea that this child was actually the missing Stephen Stainer. The 2nd of March, 1980. Stephen's older brother Carey was driving home from a camping trip in Yosemite, somewhere the family had gone to before. He'd been with his friends when the radio bulletin suddenly stopped him cold. His 14-year-old brother, Stephen, had escaped his kidnapper and would be returning home that very afternoon.
7 long years ago, a youngster in California vanished.
Carey later admitted he was so overwhelmed with excitement that he almost drove his car into the river. And it was true. The now 14-year-old Stephen was home. He had survived his ordeal against all the odds. And he wasn't alone. With him was 5-year-old Timmy White, who had been kidnapped just 16 days before. Stephen told police he didn't want Timmy to suffer through what he had. He knew he needed to fight for their survival and freedom. So when the opportunity was there, he took Timmy and escaped. The pair hitchhiked and walked over 40 miles to Ukiah. When they got to the police station, Stephen said to the officer, "I know my first name is Stephen."
There he is, there he is.
Stephen's return has been a joyous event.
News vans lined the quiet streets, satellite dishes sprouted in front yards, and reporters crowded onto the family's doorstep, eager to capture the story that so many thought would never have a happy ending. Some friends and professionals quietly suggested to Stephen's mother that it might help for him to see a counsellor, but Kay Stainer dismissed the idea, insisting that it wouldn't be necessary. The family was already under enormous strain. Life inside the house had become tense, as everyone tried to adjust to the sudden shift from believing Stephen was probably dead to having him back under their roof. School offered little refuge for Stephen either. Classmates bullied him, mocking his sexuality, because his abuser had been a man. Kenneth Parnell would be apprehended, and the family were in the spotlight once again when he went on trial. Stephen testified that Parnell had brainwashed him into believing that his family could no longer afford to look after him, so the courts had given him custody. Stephen said he had always been taught that adults don't lie, so he believed him. Whilst it was deemed that there was insufficient evidence to try him for sexual abuse, Parnell was convicted on kidnapping and false imprisonment charges. After an 18-day trial, he was sentenced to 8 years and 8 months in prison in February of 1982. He would serve just 5 years. After his release, Parnell did the same thing again and got someone else to help him abduct another boy. He was caught and went back to prison, where he would die in 2008. For the Stainers, Stephen's return should have been the end of their nightmare, but life didn't slip back to normal. The family stayed fractured, with the pain never being fully spoken about. As the years passed, the story of Stephen's abduction became something else the rest of the world moved on from, but in the mountains that the family had always loved and explored, Yosemite, a new darkness was quietly taking shape. Nearly 20 years later, the discovery of Joey Armstrong's decapitated body in July 1999 sent Yosemite into a panic. Joey Armstrong grew up in Orlando and was one of the most beloved members of the Yosemite Institute staff. She was described as a creative, brave woman. If she was scared of something, she would confront it head-on, always throwing herself into whatever she could. She had long dreamt of becoming an instructor at Yosemite, a goal she was able to reach, and Joey was in her element there, doing what she loved and embracing everything that the place had to offer. She was cheerful and full of energy, and loved taking children on hikes through the park's backcountry, teaching them about its history, its wildlife, its native plants and insects. She would even tap dance in hiking boots to make her students laugh. She and her boyfriend, a fellow instructor called Michael Raffaelli, had lived a few miles away in a rustic cabin they called the Greenhouse. "I love it here in this house," she wrote to a friend back in Florida. "I love Michael with my soul and every last cell in my body. I love the big meadow with all its daisies and incredible history." On the 21st of July 1999, Joey had got to work at around 8 a.m, and her day had passed by as normal. She told her colleagues that she was worried about spending a night alone in the cabin, as both her roommate and boyfriend were away. Just before the sun set, she began loading her car for her trip. Her car that had never pulled out of the driveway. What made her case even more terrifying for people there was that just a few months before, a woman and 2 girls had gone missing in another brutal crime that police thought they had solved. They were now faced with the idea that maybe they had got it wrong and that their killer was still out there. 42-year-old Carol Sund, her 15-year-old daughter Julie, and Julie's friend Silvina Peloso, a 16-year-old from Argentina, had triggered one of the largest searches in the history of the area. Carol was a remarkable woman. She was a child advocate who would attend court to be a voice for the voiceless. Helping people and serving her community was her whole life. Julie, much like her mom, was someone who always wanted to excel and try her hardest with everything she did. Julie and Silvina had been friends since before they could walk. For the 3 of them, it was meant to be the trip of a lifetime. Carol's father Francis recalled that they were happy when he spoke to them on the phone that day. They were having the time of their lives, he said. After dinner at the Cedar Lodge restaurant where they were staying, they headed back to their room, number 509, tucked away in the far west wing of the lodge. After their time in Yosemite came to an end, they were going to be heading back to the red Pontiac that Carol had rented, and then to the airport to meet Carol's husband, but they never turned up. The police were soon at the lodge and a search for the missing 3 was underway, but the room they had stayed in wasn't revealing much. They hadn't checked out, the towels were wet in the bathroom, but there were no clothes, and the car was gone too. There weren't any signs of foul play, so as the searches began, they were working on the assumption that they had become lost or trapped. They had so many out searching, and a plane even flew over Yosemite, hoping that the eye in the sky could give them the lead they were looking for. Carol's mom, also called Carol, and her dad Francis turned up to help in the search, driving for miles to try and find the car. Francis had even searched the garbage bins at the motel looking for sheets that had blood on them. As he did, he noticed something strange. The maintenance man for Cedar Lodge was peeking round the corner, staring at him. He said something felt off, but he couldn't quite work out what it was. But one thing was clear. The maintenance man was not his primary focus. It was Carol, Julie and Silvina. Search teams fanned out across the steep granite slopes and dense pine forest. The terrain was treacherous and vast, miles upon miles of wilderness where a single wrong turn could leave even an experienced parkgoer stranded and invisible. It was an immense, unforgiving place in which 3 tourists could disappear without leaving much of a trace. And there was no trace. There was nothing. This meant that the officers were now having to consider the unthinkable. Had they actually been abducted? For weeks, hundreds of FBI agents, along with California Highway Patrol officers and National Park Service rangers, scoured Yosemite with helicopters and dogs. The 19th of March, 1999. Just over a month since they disappeared. A hiker stumbled upon a burnt-out Pontiac along a remote logging road, miles and miles away from Cedar Lodge. It turned out to be Carol Sund's missing rental car. The fire had been so intense, it reached up to the trees towering 25 feet above it, and even singed the branches. Inside the trunk, investigators found the burned and tied-up bodies of Silvina and Carol. There was no trace of Julie. Strewn around the car were some shoes and clothes, giving hope to the family that maybe Julie had been able to survive and escape. The investigators and agents went into overdrive searching the area, hoping that Julie was alive somewhere nearby. One of the items that had also been found by the car was a camera, It contained the usual snaps that people take on their trips, but the last few sent a shiver down the spine. It was the three of them in the Cedar Lodge on the night they went missing, relaxing, having fun, and getting ready to wind down. Then, there were no more photographs. Fear swept through Yosemite in a way few had ever experienced before. This was supposed to be a sanctuary. Violent crime was almost unheard of. For years, the park had prided itself on being one of the safest stretches of wilderness in America, with crime rates so low that rangers rarely dealt with more than the occasional theft or lost hiker. But now that illusion of safety had shattered. Parents called in a panic, youth group leaders asked which trails to avoid, and visitors who had once wandered freely began sticking close to guided tours. One of the residents who was staying at the park was stood talking to one of the maintenance men. She said how awful it was that Julie hadn't been found yet. He said he knew that feeling all too well. His brother had once gone missing, so he was hoping that she would be found soon. Then, just a few days later, a letter came through to the FBI. It was a hand-drawn map showing a trail from Highway 120, with an X marked on the shore of the Don Pedro Reservoir. The note said, "We had fun with this one." The FBI wasted no time and drove over to the spot indicated on the map. They let the search dog out, who in very little time made the discovery. Julie had finally been found, hidden in dense underbrush near an overlook on the Don Pedro Reservoir, just a few miles from where the car had been abandoned. Her throat had been slashed in a vicious murder. By the spring, the FBI had zeroed in on two primary suspects from Modesto. They were ex-convicts with violent histories and drug abuse. Michael Larwick and his half-brother Eugene Dykes were both sitting in the Modesto County Jail. Larwick on charges of shooting a Modesto police officer, and Dykes for parole violations and drug possession. Behind the scenes, FBI agents told the media that the men were tied to the murders through acrylic fibres analysed at the Bureau's lab in Washington. In June, James M. Maddock, head of the FBI's Sacramento office, went as far to say, "We have all of the main players in jail, but we are in no rush to charge them." The news was that whoever was responsible had likely been caught, and it was a huge relief. Finally, they could relax again. But now, Joey had been murdered, and they were beginning to think that perhaps they had got this wrong. Joey's mom contacted the FBI upon hearing news that a body had been found. She asked if the person had red hair like Joey. They couldn't say. Then she would see on the front page, "Yosemite naturalist, beheaded." That was how she found out. And soon the fear was back. Park rangers were inundated with calls from worried people asking which areas might no longer be safe. Requests for guided hikes surged as visitors sought reassurance in the face of growing fear. Then, finally, someone would come forward. A worker had driven past Joey's hut around the time she had gone missing and noticed a distinctive blue and white 1979 International Scout parked outside. When they checked the records, the police realised that there were only 2 such vehicles registered in the area. One of them belonged to the maintenance man at Cedar Lodge, the same place that Carol, Julie and Sylvina had been taken from. This prompted the police to issue a be on the lookout alert for the vehicle. And just a couple of days after Joey was killed, 2 rangers spotted that same vehicle parked along California 140 in the Merced River Canyon. Climbing down to the riverbank, one ranger and a Mariposa County detective found a man sunbathing naked and smoking a joint. He introduced himself as Carey. The officers seized his drugs but let him go, but that didn't mean he was out of the picture. They still had the vehicle at the forefront of their minds, because that surely was not a coincidence. The FBI compared the tyre tracks from the crime scene with photos from this vehicle's tyres, and got an exact match. 2 days later, the 37-year-old was eating lunch at a clothing-optional resort near Sacramento when officers moved in and arrested him. Jeffrey Reinick, who at the time was an FBI special agent, would later be the one who got the man to talk. He was able to build up trust with him, and this would pay off in spades when he asked to talk to him by himself. When Special Agent Reinick went into the room, Carey was slumped and clearly had something on his mind. Over the following 6 hours, he would make a horrifying confession. He admitted to the murders of Carol Sund, Julie Sund, Sylvina Peloso, and Joey Armstrong. He was the Yosemite Park killer, the friendly maintenance man who'd helped guests at Cedar Lodge, who'd watched Francis going through the trash, who'd mentioned in passing that his own brother had once gone missing. This man wasn't just a witness to tragedy, he was its author. His name was Cary Stayner, Stephen Stayner's brother. He told the FBI that he had fantasized about harming women since childhood, and said that he had been powerless to stop his urges to kill. For months, the killer had been hiding in plain sight, quietly working at the Cedar Lodge while investigators searched for answers. FBI agents had even interviewed Cary Stayner 2 times early on in the case, but dismissed him as not being involved. He'd struck them as polite, ordinary, unremarkable really. On top of that, his own past and what had happened to his brother made it almost unthinkable that he could have become such a violent offender himself. What most people knew about him came from headlines about his brother's abduction, but who was Cary Stayner? He had been born on the 12th of August 1961 and raised in the farming town of Merced in California. He was the eldest of 5 children born to parents Delbert, a maintenance worker, who put in 18-hour shifts during harvest season, and his wife Kay, who ran a daycare and worked at various food service jobs in high school cafeterias. The Stayner family had lived in a small house on Betty Street. Cary went to the local public school and spent summers swimming in the pool in the backyard and playing outfield on his baseball team. He was shy, reserved, rarely showing any signs of being upset or shaken by what was going on around him. When Cary was 11, his world was turned upside down when Stephen was abducted. His family was suddenly in the midst of a story that was well beyond their control, and they were under the spotlight in a way that so few would ever experience or even begin to understand. As the years passed by with unanswered questions about what had happened to Stephen, life for the family did carry on, albeit in a very difficult way. Some of the Stayner family's neighbours, those who knew them beyond the headlines, could see the damage that Stephen's kidnapping had left behind. "I think it must have really affected Cary," said Michael Coleman, who had lived next door for 2 decades. While his brother was missing, Cary went to Hoover Intermediate School, where he was placed in a gifted 7th grade class. He later attended Merced High, and spent most of his time doodling, reading comic books and listening to heavy metal music. He was known for drawing caricatures of the people around him, turning classmates and acquaintances into exaggerated, cartoon-like figures. This talent saw him become the cartoonist for the high school paper, and many of those who worked with him saw that he had a very bright future. He was the oldest cliché in the world, the proverbial quiet guy. He was always drawing, said Jack Bungart, who worked on the paper with him. "I always thought the next time I saw Cary's name in the newspaper it would be for a cartoon." For the most part, people remembered Cary as keeping to himself. As other boys began dating, no one seemed to recall him ever going out with a girl. Some girls told his friends they were interested in him, but Cary never seemed to pursue anyone. A long-time neighbour named Victoria Flores Tatum remembered seeing a darker side of Cary. When he was 16, one of his sisters had a sleepover. One of those in attendance was a then 14-year-old Victoria. She said that Cary had crept under her bed while she slept and reached up to grab her chest. She told him to go away, but he soon came back, standing naked in the doorway. She told him again to leave her alone, and he did. 18-year-old Cary had gone through his teens without his little brother, and now, suddenly against all the odds, Stephen was home. To those close enough to witness it, Cary's struggle wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there, simmering beneath the surface as the family tried to navigate the aftermath of something that the rest of the world had only watched from afar. In 1991, a book titled I Know My First Name is Stephen by author Mike Eccles was published. One of the quotes from Cary was, "I remember going out one night after Stephen disappeared and wishing on a star that my brother would come back home. I did that almost every clear night from then on, until Stephen finally came back home. I never did tell anybody about it, but I remember wishing on a star that my little brother would come back home. When Stephen finally returned," Cary said, "I walked several blocks away and then looked up at the stars and started to wish on one again. But then I remembered that Steve was back home, so I thanked the star instead." A mini-series of the same name was also written, and screenwriter J.P. Miller spent months with the family as research, and Cary would admit his resentment. His head was all bloated out, he said. "We never really got along well after he came back. I guess I was jealous, I'm sure I was. I got put on the back burner, you might say." In one very telling bit of footage, as the family gathered in the front yard full of smiles for a press conference, there was one person who wasn't smiling. Carey stood stiffly at the back before simply walking away. Rather than fulfilling the bright future once imagined for him, Carey drifted through a string of jobs, from moving furniture to installing windows and building shower doors. Outside of work, he often hung out at friends' houses, smoking drugs and watching sitcoms. Beneath his quiet exterior, he had disturbing urges, impulses that he admitted he didn't fully understand. He told a co-worker he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, but shrugged it off, saying he could manage it just by smoking drugs. Though he reportedly dated a few women briefly over the years, he seemed unable to form any long-lasting, stable, or meaningful relationships. In 1990, more tragedy would strike the family, as police were called to the house that Carey lived in with his Uncle Jerry. Jerry lay dead in the bedroom, having been killed by a shotgun blast to the chest. Carey was questioned but had an alibi, saying he had been at work. He said that a homeless person had been lurking around the property just before the murder, but this lead went nowhere, and the case went unsolved. One of his last jobs had been as a glass cutter. One day he had been found by his friend repeatedly punching a piece of wood, cutting his hand badly in the process. He said he felt like getting in his truck, driving it into the office, and killing the boss and everyone else in there, and torching the place. His friend was able to get Carey into a psychiatric centre where he received counselling. Not long after, he went back to work, picked up his cheque, and never went back, saying he was thinking of moving to Santa Cruz. He would later be arrested in 1997 for possession of marijuana for sale. In the summer of that year, he took a job as a maintenance man at the Cedar Lodge, a motel in El Portal, along Highway 140, the road heading into Yosemite. He dealt with everything from plumbing repairs to setting up pool furniture and taking care of the endless small jobs needed to keep the motel running for the many guests. On his days off, he was known to relax by sunbathing naked at a few secluded spots along the river. One thing that Carey would do was always carry a backpack with him. In this backpack, later referred to as his murder kit, he would have a gun, duct tape, and a knife. He would later begin seeing a waitress who worked at the lodge who had 2 young daughters. The daughter of the waitress would later talk about her experience of him, saying he initially appeared safe, but that facade would soon fall. She would recall a time when they were down by the river, and Carey took all of his clothes off. She said she felt very uncomfortable by it, but turned around and went up the river, trying not to pay him any attention at all. The disturbing revelations about him continued, when then Special Agent Jeff Reinick said that Carey had actually said he was going to kill his girlfriend and her 2 daughters on February the 15th, but when he saw another person on the grounds where they resided, he knew that was no longer an option, so he changed his plan. The 15th of February, 1999.
I walked towards a red car in the 500 building all by itself. The window was open, the curtain was open, I could see inside that there was 2 young women and the mother and no man.
The following is Carey Stayner's account of what happened that night. At around 11 p.m, he approached room 509 carrying a toolbox filled with rope, duct tape, a knife and a gun. He knocked on the door and introduced himself as the motel handyman and told Carol there was a leak in the room above and he just needed to check for water damage on their ceiling. Carol was cautious and looked around, seeing no signs of any such leak, but Carey persisted until she finally let him inside. He made small talk at first, ducked into the bathroom to keep up the ruse, and then came out holding a gun. He told them not to panic. He said he was only there to rob them. He then tied them up and gagged them with duct tape, moving Sylvina and Julie to the bathroom before going back to Carol on the bed. Without a word, he quickly strangled her with rope. "I didn't realise how hard it is to strangle a person. It's not easy," he said. Taking her keys, he dragged her body outside and lifted it into the trunk of the red Pontiac. When he went back, he sexually assaulted Julie and Sylvina before separating them. He took Julie to the bathroom in the adjacent room and left her there tied up so he could clean up the crime scene. He then strangled Sylvina to death in the bathtub. At around 4 a.m, Carey carried Julie out to the car and placed her in the front seat of the vehicle. He later told the FBI that she still didn't know that her mother and Sylvina were already dead. He pulled the duct tape from her mouth and then drove west through the dark Merced River Canyon, unsure of exactly where he was headed, making casual small talk with the terrified girl as they went. Just before sunrise, he pulled into an empty parking area and took Julie out of the car before carrying her up the hill, going towards the Dom Pedro Reservoir. He later told the FBI that Julie, shivering in the cold, had asked him to carry her and claimed that he held her in his arms, like a bridegroom carrying his bride across the threshold. A law enforcement source later suggested that this detail revealed his warped sense of reality. It fit with his fantasy, where there was some kind of relationship between him and Julie. He would later say that he'd grown to like Julie, who had given him a fake name, Sarah, saying that he wished he could keep her. Once they reached the overlook, he sexually assaulted her again, brushed her hair out, allegedly told her he loved her, and slit her throat. He then hid her body, nearly decapitated, in the dense underbrush. Carey was adamant that he had never tortured or sexually assaulted them, even saying, bizarrely, that he wanted their deaths to be as painless and humane as possible. He then abandoned the car a few hundred yards down a logging trail off of California 108, and then walked 2 miles to Sierra Village and called for a taxi, paying with the money he had stolen from Carol's purse. The taxi driver, Jenny, was struck by the dishevelled, weary-looking man who asked to be taken to the Yosemite Lodge. Jenny never reported the trip to the police at the time, but after Carey's arrest months later, she recalled an unusual conversation they had had along the way. "Do you believe in Bigfoot?" he asked. "No," she replied. "You should," he said, "because he's real." Back at the lodge, he appeared to be completely normal, even taking FBI agents around various rooms around the property so they could take samples. The only time he appeared to mention the murders was when he said to a female co-worker, apparently annoyed at a couple of agents having lunch at the restaurant, "Why didn't the FBI ever search for my brother?" Carey said he closely followed the FBI investigation. When the police didn't return to arrest him, he said he knew that the impulse to murder again was not one he could ignore. "I would have kept killing until I was caught or killed," he said. He had been laid off for the winter, as was usual with most staff, but was rehired at the lodge on the 20th of March, the day after the bodies of Carol and Sylvina were found. He would also admit to writing the letter and sending it to the FBI, detailing where Julie's body could be found. Employees at the Cedar Lodge would often gather at the restaurant booth with a view of the trees along the river. Carey would sometimes join them there, sitting in as they discussed the murders.
For the past 2 years, Carey Stainer rented a room above the Cedar Lodge restaurant. He worked next door at the motel as a handyman, and it was at Cedar Lodge that local teens got to know him.
We were sitting there swimming. He walked in to do his job around the pool, do some handyman work, and Aaron hollered at him, told him to come over and meet us, and every day after that, pretty much that we were over there, we'd see him and talk to him for about 5 minutes.
Parker Bevington and Aaron Ludwig both work at the Chevron just down the road from Cedar Lodge. Both young men are stunned. The man they were friendly with has apparently confessed to last week's killing. They insist he couldn't have seemed more normal.
I've never even seen the man violent at all. He's never even really raised his voice, even when we're just sitting there talking.
He always made us feel pretty much like we had nothing to worry about. Never made us feel uncomfortable.
Carey described the first time he had had such dark fantasies. When he was just 7 years old, he had been sitting in his parents' car as they went grocery shopping. He stared through the window of the store, eyes fixed on the female employees at the checkout. He said he started to imagine what it would be like to kill them. After that, these fantasies would continue to rear their head, dreams of setting traps for women and murdering them. He said for 30 years he had kept this to himself, never telling a soul. He added that he dreamed of having a TV movie of the week made about his crimes and life. But what about what had happened to Joey? On the 21st of July, Carey said he had driven to Forester Road. It was a place that he said he saw Bigfoot, something he was absolutely fascinated with. He said he had been talking about Bigfoot with 26-year-old Joey. He said he happened to come across her in front of her cabin, and when he realised that she was by herself, he could not control the urge to murder her. "I was just over there throwing rocks in the creek and just happened to notice her walk out again and again. It seemed like she was alone," he said. What follows is what Carey said happened after he came into contact with Joey. He pulled up and, trying to make her feel less nervous, asked her if she had ever seen Bigfoot. He said he had seen it once in the fields behind her cabin. Knowing for sure that she was by herself, he pulled out his gun and made her go back into the cabin. He then tied her up and gagged her with tape before ordering her to go back outside. He forced her into his car and began to drive. Joey, unbelievably, was able to get the door open and leap out of the car as he drove. and she ran as fast as she could through the woodlands along Crane Creek, heading for her friend's cabin just a couple of 100 yards away. Carey stopped the car, got out, and chased her. She was able to get about 150 yards away before he got to her. He grabbed her from behind, slit her throat, and continued his attack until she was decapitated. He dumped her body in a ditch and then disposed of her head about 40 feet away. He fled back up to his vehicle and went back up towards the Yosemite exit, but he didn't get far. His car broke down and refused to move. He then flagged down a park ranger who gave him a lift. He had just abducted and brutally murdered a woman, but to the ranger, he seemed calm, affable, easygoing. Literally nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Special Agent Reineck, who had got him to talk, said that it felt like he had a sense of relief when he had got it all off his chest. But before Carey would admit to what he had done, he had tried to bargain. He said he either wanted to get his family to have the reward money, be in a prison close to them, or, shockingly, see child sexual abuse images of young girls. He told the FBI that his urge to see such material had been gnawing away at me my whole life. It's sick, disgusting, perverted, I know that. I can't go to prison for the rest of my life and be happy without seeing it. Reineck asked him to pick one of the options he'd suggested. His choice was the sexual abuse material. He chose that over money for his family, and being close to them. He would not get any of his requests granted. But he would confess. He admitted to the triple homicide, saying he had planned the crime for over a year, and he said he had drawn the map because it was bothering him that Julie's body was out there in the elements, not being found. But on the 6th of August, he entered a plea of not guilty to the murder of Carol, Julie and Sylvina. His parents were in the courtroom and he refused to make eye contact with them. The affidavit said that he provided details about the crime, which were not generally known outside of law enforcement, which corroborated his confession. In a letter to the Fresno Bee that he sent from his cell in the middle of August, he said that he was truly very sorry for the damage he'd caused, and that he had hoped to sell the rights to his story to Hollywood and give the money made to the families of the victims. I realised that the money would be little consolation for the loss of their loved ones, but until the jury, judge and executioner fulfil their roles in this matter, it's all I have to offer, he wrote. Since his confession, several unsolved murders from the area were reopened, including that of his own uncle who had been shot to death. Another case they were looking into was the murder of a 23-year-old woman named Sherilyn Murphy. In October 1994, her severed hands had been found by a reservoir. 2 months later, her headless torso was found off of a mountain road in Calaveras County. Her head was never found, and her case went cold. Calaveras County Sheriff Sergeant Steve Matthews said that authorities had not established a link between Carey and any unsolved cases in the area, but they were not ruling out the possibility. After he was arrested, the FBI contacted the waitress he had been seeing, and her daughter recalled the news they had been told that had made their blood run cold. The FBI went in and spoke with my mom privately to let her know that Carey Stayner had confessed to initially wanting to kill my mom and rape and kill my sister and I. They were also told that he had actually attempted to murder them 3 times, including after murdering Joey. On the day he was arrested, he had gone looking for them, but they were at their grandmother's house. For many, this shocking news was extremely hard to reconcile with the Carey Stayner they thought they knew, especially how he had behaved in the aftermath. One former reporter said that he didn't set off any alarm bells and appeared to be helpful. He was the guy opening all the rooms for the FBI to gather evidence. It was also hard for the investigators, especially since they thought they knew who had killed Carol, Julie and Sylvina before Joey was murdered. James M. Maddock, head of the FBI's Sacramento office, admitted that he had spent countless hours reflecting since Carey's arrest, questioning whether the FBI could have done anything to stop Joey's murder. I've struggled with that issue and I continue to, he said. But he did add that he was confident that they had done everything that could reasonably be done. Carol's parents said that they did feel some closure when they heard about the arrest, saying it was better than to let your imagination work on you. At his trial, the defence were hoping to demonstrate that Carey was too mentally ill to form intent when he committed the murders. This doctor has spent more than 21 hours interviewing Carey and more than 3 talking to his mom and dad, as well as extensively researching his medical history. He said that Carey was an extremely troubled person who had inherited many of his mental health problems, including exhibitionism and paedophilia. There is extensive mental illness in his family dating back 2 generations, he said. He ranks as having one of the most amazing psychiatric histories I've seen in a long time. Dr. Silver said that Carey and Carey's father both had paraphilia, a condition defined as being characterised by unusual sexual desires, typically involving extreme or dangerous activities. The doctor said that Carey and his mother both had depression. Dr. Silver told the court that Carey had mild autism and exhibited symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder, including pulling his own hair out, which was why he so often wore hats. He said that he had started having hallucinations that grew increasingly sexual and violent. For example, Dr. Silver said, Carey repeatedly fantasized about young girls on his street being raped, and sometimes in these fantasies he would save them, and other times he would dream about joining in. He said that Carey started having these thoughts around the same time that his father had begun sexually abusing his sisters. It was also stated that Carey had been molested as a child, but who the perpetrator of the alleged abuse was is not clear. He said that Carey was unable to control these delusions and became more and more withdrawn from reality, adding that there was strong evidence that Carey suffered from brain damage, potentially caused by a prenatal accident. But the prosecution's case was that Carey was cold, cunning, and calculating. He was someone who seemed to revel in the panic and fear his crimes had brought. A couple of nights after the murders, he had gone back to the abandoned Pontiac, scratched "We Have Sarah" into the hood, the fake name that Julie had given him, and then set it on fire, before later that week dropping Carol's wallet in a random street in Modesto to throw the investigators off. He also had someone else lick the stamp that went onto the letter that he sent to the FBI. The prosecutor said that these were not the actions of someone who was not mentally competent, and Carey Stainer was found to be sane. After just over 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of the premeditated murders of Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Silvina Peloso. He was also convicted of 5 other felonies, including sexually assaulting Julie and Silvina and burglarising the motel room. These were special circumstances that meant the death penalty was on the table. In an intensely emotional courtroom hearing packed with such horrendous and devastating evidence that at one point the judge suddenly stepped out of the room to regain his composure, and when he returned just a few minutes later, his face was flushed and his eyes were wet with tears. The judge agreed with the jury's recommendation, and Carey Stainer was sentenced to death for the murders of Carol, Julie and Silvina. "He tortured my daughter," Carol's husband said. "I know he has no trouble killing little girls in the middle of the night. I just wish he would step up and take his punishment now." Jose Peloso, Silvina's father, had travelled with his wife from Argentina to be at the trial, and he said he had thought about charging at Carey and breaking his neck. "Nothing can be done to bring my daughter back," he said with tears in his eyes. "Her death is a sorrow I will have to live with for the rest of my life." During one of the preliminary hearings, he had tried to run at Carey, but was stopped and escorted out. Carey's parents, Kay and Delbert, said they were prepared for the death sentence, but said that he should be shown mercy, adding that he was a sick man deprived of a fair trial by a judge who was biased. "I stand by my son," Delbert said outside the courthouse. Carey also pleaded guilty in federal court to the murder of Joey Armstrong and was sentenced to life in prison for that offence. Under California law, his death sentence would be automatically appealed, a process that could take years, and California has not carried out an execution since 2006, so it looks more and more unlikely that he will go to the death chamber. One person that you might be wondering about is Carey's brother, Stephen, and what had happened to him after he returned home. His life was never really easy, but he would later marry and have 2 children. His story would also be turned into the television movie called I Know My First Name is Stephen. J.P. Miller, the co-screenwriter, said he was kind of a reckless kid after he came back home. He wrecked a couple of cars and I talked to him about being careful because he could kill himself. He said, "What's dying?" Like so much had already happened to him. What was dying compared to that? But he added that Stephen was bravely going about reconstructing his life. He didn't complain, he didn't whine, he was just a great kid with a good heart. On the 16th of September 1989, as he was riding his motorbike home from his job as a pizza delivery man, a car pulled out in front of him. Stephen was not wearing a helmet and suffered massive head injuries as he hit the driver's side door. The driver then took off. Less than 1 hour later, at the age of just 24, Stephen Stainer died. His wife Jodie said she had never been so angry. It would have been a lot different if this man who hit him had stayed. If it's the last thing I'll do, I'll nail him, vowed Jodie. The driver of the car would later surrender himself to police. She said that Stephen was becoming a very happy man living a normal life with 2 beautiful kids. His children were just 2 and 3 when he died. When Stephen was killed, his parents were on a camping trip. Their friends were able to track them down to tell them what had happened. His parents were consumed by grief. His mum said she felt like Stephen had just been on loan to them. She was the one who stayed so strong and calm and collected through that 7-year ordeal, said a friend. But her strength is waning now. This is the hardest thing she has ever had to face, and she just can't talk to anybody. Adding that Delbert was devastated too, but he was the one staying strong for his wife. It's final this time, Stephen's father said. I know where Stevie's at now. I Know My First Name is Stephen was nominated for 4 Emmys. Stephen was killed just a day before the awards. In Applegate Park, a statue in Stephen's memory was put up, dedicated to his heroism, his bravery, and his incredible actions that had saved not only him, but little Timmy White too, and perhaps other children. He wasn't the only one that left a mark. Founded in Joey's memory, the Armstrong Scholars was created to empower young women and give them the tools to chase their dreams and achieve their goals. Carol Sund, Julie Sund, Sylvina Peloso, and Joey Armstrong were not just names in a case file. They were vibrant, loving, extraordinary people whose lives were stolen in a place that they should have been safe. Carol was a devoted mom who just wanted to show her daughter the beauty of the world. Julie was just 15, bright, kind-hearted, with her whole future ahead of her. Sylvina had come over from Argentina, chasing opportunity and adventure, trusting in the goodness of the world. And Joey was a light in Yosemite, an educator, a friend, someone who believed in protecting nature and sharing it with others. Their lives mattered, they were loved, and they deserved so much more than the violence they faced. As we close this chapter and end this case, we remember them not only for their final moments, but for who they were, and for the joy and humanity they brought into the world. Thank you all for tuning in, and we hope you found this video interesting. If you'd like to support our channel and help us to continue to make content, please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. It helps us so much and we really appreciate it.